Hey everybody, it's Bina007 here. Very pleased to say that we have Amin from a podcast of Ice and Fire, who is going to answer some questions about the genesis of VOK and his thoughts of on all things A Song of Ice and Fire. So welcome, Amin.
Great to be here.
Yeah, well, great to have someone from the Daddy podcast on. We are but your little scampy children running around causing chaos. So
You've reached the teenage years at least, I think, by now.
the awkward teens, exactly.
Or maybe that was a couple of years ago. I think you got past those problems, I think.
Indeed. So we have got a bunch of questions that we as VOK curators put together to ask you, but feel free to chip in on anything else. So
Sure.
the first one, I think, speaks of maybe the youth of some of our newest curators. Can you tell us about the mystical time in the Song of Ice and Fire fandom before the show and book number 5? Like, where did people go to discuss things, and what were the most popular topics and theories, and what was the reaction to the release of Feast? So maybe just tell us how you got into the books, because I don't know. I don't.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I got into the books slightly before Storm of Swords coming out, so I think around 2000. My friend had recommended a book. I usually got my fantasy from him. He would usually find things, and he's like, "Oh, this book has like a super long prologue. You got to get into this thing." I was like, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." And so I started reading the books, and by the time I was getting through Clash is when Storm came out. And so I read Storm of Swords, and then I thought, okay, what am I going to do next? And at that point, I went online, and there was Westeros.org was up there, so that's mainly where I went to on the forums there to discuss the theories. We thought that the next book, Feast for Crows, would come out. I mean, we didn't know the title would come out in the same kind of like pace, but that was the first book that had a delay. So I remember spending a couple of years just going online, seeing the posts, and waiting for that book. And then, in comparison to A Storm of Swords, is a bit of a disappointment because Feast is no storm, right? So
Well, yeah. I mean, I love Cersei and Jaime, so I think I have more tolerance for it than most. But yeah, you're right. It is a bit of a shock. So what was the tone of the community at that time? Were people kind of tolerant? It was the first of the waits, so maybe they were a bit more generous of spirit than we are now. I mean, were people pissed or were they okay?
They were okay, I think. Yeah, it was longer than usual, but they were fine. Actually, I remember now that in between A Storm of Swords and A Feast for Crows, I mean, Martin did the usual thing. He had spoiler chapters, but he also had, and at that time, I think I actually read them. Now I don't do that anymore. But he released part of the Greyjoy storyline like in a magazine. He's in all the Greyjoy moot and all of that. I remember buying that magazine.
I didn't realize that. That's amazing.
I have that actually. I don't have it right here, but I think it was in Dragon magazine, or Arms of the Kraken is what it was called. So he released a portion of it. So it's kind of cool to read. And that was the first we really got on the Greyjoys in depth, right, before getting the fourth book. So, and then it came out. I remember buying the fourth book, going to get it, and kind of powering it through it. And I mean, I enjoyed it, but it was no storm. But then we thought, okay, well, he'll just go on to the next book. It'll be okay, right?
So, did you kind of join a podcast of Ice and Fire between Feast and Dance, presumably? Because I was listening before Dance and you were on. Is that right? Or am I misremembering that?
Yeah. That's right. It was so around 2007, I got into podcasts in general. And this is actually kind of interesting because I got into, it was a British podcast, Make It So, which is for Star Trek. And then they actually did other podcasts. There was like a group of British people that did another podcast like Movies You Should See. And it's actually kind of like VOK in a sense. It didn't inspire VOK at all, but it was a group of people that did a variety of different podcasts, like different shows and stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it was British humor, so I enjoyed them. And thought, okay, well, maybe I'll try out this podcasting thing. So I had a few different ideas. I thought, like, well, Ice and Fire, I'm always been into that. I've been playing the board game. I was always the person in my group of friends in real life that did ask me for theories and stuff. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go do a podcast on that. But I considered other alternatives. In fact, I even recorded an episode. It was going to be a podcast about the TV show Frasier.
Oh my goodness. How different your life could have been.
Well, we did the one episode. We thought we can't do a podcast on this. You can't really do a whole podcast on a comedy. You can do a single episode, which you could do that, but it would just didn't really have the legs to go anywhere, right?
Yeah, you need
and
to
I
have
think
the
I have
richness.
that recorded somewhere.
You need to find that. You need to send us an audio clip. That would be hilarious.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find at least a clip from it, if I can find it. Yeah.
Yeah, that would
so
be
then
cool.
I thought Ice and Fire is good. So then I searched to see if there was any Ice and Fire podcasts, and this is just early 2008. And there was the one, I think, yeah, there was Winter is Coming, had been going for a while, but then it had gone into hiatus. And so I thought, okay, well, there's no active podcast anymore, so I'll make one. But I also kept searching to see if anyone was doing it. And then this will show the like what timeline we're talking about, 2008. I went onto LiveJournal You ever use
George is
LiveJournal?
George is still using it. No, I have no.
Yeah.
I've never used.
I don't think he was
LiveJournal.
using LiveJournal at that time though, but it was popular. Like he got into it late too, which is funny. But or maybe he was using it at that time actually, but I don't remember. But I was searching LiveJournal, and then Mimi had posted on LiveJournal in one of the, like, I guess the Ice and Fire LiveJournal, that she was looking for people to work with to make a podcast. And I thought, well, at least I'll talk to this person instead of just making my own. If she's already kind of like looking for people. They hadn't started yet. She was just, I think she had found Chris at that time.
Okay. Original
And,
Chris.
That's right, original Chris, old man Chris. And
That's kind of before my time, actually, and I've not gone back to listen to the ones before I started listening.
don't. They're not good.
Oh, those were, I love those podcasts.
Oh, hey Nadia. So everyone, this is OG curator from VOK, Nadia, calling in, defending valiantly early podcast.
And my dog.
So when did you start listening to Podcast of Ice and Fire, Nadia? Were you from like episode 1, or did you go back to episode 1?
I didn't start from, I started listening from episode 1, but I think I started listening when they were around like episode 30, I think.
Yeah, I think I came
Somewhere around
in.
there.
I think I might have come in at 50, so it's still pretty early, but yeah, not quite at the beginning, and I didn't go back, but maybe I will now. Just dip in, see what it was like, relive our youth, sweet summer children that we were.
A couple of the key episodes, I mean, within the first 20, I think we had our first guys' night out, girls' night out stuff. Like some of the key ideas were developed back then that we perfected later, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and then we shamelessly stole. In fact, we need to do another Gulp and Guys Night Out. We haven't done one in a while. Oh, dear. So that's really interesting. So your first real weight was for Feast, and then you got. So when did you know that Feast was only going to have half the characters?
I don't remember if he had released that information a year before. He released it before it came out. I know at some point, he did have the LiveJournal post. I remember him posting somewhere saying, "Oh, okay, here's an update that we're going to split it in half. We'll have this first book, and then the next book, like a year later, I'll get to the second part." In fact, the copy of Feast that I have says that at the start. It says like, "Where's the other characters? Oh, they'll be coming in a year."
But we were discussing this on a VOK recently, and some people's editions, mine says it at the start, some say it at the end. And I think it was like Hannah, Shadow Baby, and maybe the Lord Baron was saying that they were reading Feast and getting really frustrating and not knowing where half the characters were, and only at the end was the note there, and they hadn't known.
Well, especially if they put it at the end, they wouldn't know. I mean, I do recall that he did release that online, but not everyone would have seen it, right? Like that news thing. So I'm sure many people, the fact that he had to put that information in the book meant they didn't know about it, right?
Yeah.
But I knew about it before buying it. I remember that.
So then the next question from some of the curators is, what were your highlights of those early years? And do you hear much from the previous hosts, like people like Chase, who then left at various stages through?
Sure. I guess I'll just continue on with how it started and then get into them.
Great.
Okay. Yeah. So I contacted Mimi on LiveJournal, and she said, "Okay, let's go on AOL Messenger, and so we can chat."
Another relic.
And we talked for like 3 hours on AOL Messenger about what kind of podcasts we could do, ideas, theories. So we knew that we had something there. So Mimi helped gather the rest of the people. I'm just looking to see who was there at the start. So it was me, Mimi, Chris, and then Ashley, our current Ashley, one, and Aaron. So we were a group of 5. And then it was good. Like actually early on, it was often Mimi or Chris that was running the episodes and Ashley that was editing them. So I didn't get involved till about episode 10 or so when I started doing the guys' night outs and doing edits. But what happened to them? I think Chris, he probably was busy in real life or something. I don't remember exactly why he left, but he just couldn't stay there. Aaron was never really. I used to joke that Aaron was burned out by episode 1, so he was never into the books that much, but he enjoyed being there. We had a second Ashley at a point. We had Ashley 2. I think she mainly left because of school. You remember Ashley 2? Yeah.
And there was one that disappeared, right?
Yes. What's his name?
It was Ben. I don't know.
Yes, it was Ben. It was Ben. He wasn't one of the original hosts, but he was on very early, and then he just disappeared. One day he just did not respond to email, and that was it. And then years later, I found out from him that like a tree had fallen on his house and all this stuff had happened.
Oh Jesus!
And,
oh my God, that was true. I always thought that was a joke that the tree had fallen on his house.
Urban legends of Podcast of Ice and Fire.
No, it's true. A tree did fall on his house, and then he had it caused major problems, right? Like it was winter, and he had to do all this stuff, and he just had to. I mean, you think he still would have emailed us that, but he just left, and he told me that later, and then I was like, oh, you should come back to guest host sometime. He never did, but I did use one of his audio clips years later, so he is alive.
Wow.
The audio clip proves it.
That's good to hear.
We have VOK people who just disappeared, like Drew and Lord Manderbley. Yeah, come back, Drew. And we don't know where they are. They just sort of vanished, which is a shame.
You wish they could just at least let you know, like, hey, I'm piecing out, so you know they're okay. When they just disappear.
Yeah, exactly. Because with Drew, we were like, should we be ringing around hospitals in Vegas? I mean, like, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so do you still hear from the Chases and Chris's of the world, or has that all just faded now?
I still hear from Nancy sometimes. I think we still chat by email sometime. You remember Nancy?
No, I think that's probably before my time.
Oh yeah. She was the one who had kids. I could totally.
Yeah, she was the mother perspective. Yeah. Nancy, and then Chris sometimes posts comments sometimes on the main page. Chris does. So Nancy and Chris are the people that I hear from, and then Ben, I was in contact by email. I haven't heard from Aaron or Ashley too for a long time.
And what were the highlights? Was it kind of maybe the first time you guys got to speak to the Westeros people? I don't know, like what would constitute I mean, I guess ultimately this has brought you to meet George, so that's pretty major. But like early days, like say first 50 or 60 episodes, what were the big highlights for you?
Well, we were nobodies back then, so just getting to talk to Elio and Linda from Westeros, or when we had Axe Chucker from Winter is Coming, and then we had Alex from Tower of the Hand. So just getting the different people that were already established in the fandom to come on the podcast, those were the big highlights, I think.
Yeah, and now look at you all running panels at Comic-Con and it grows up. There you go.
Starting in 2008, we never thought we would get, like if you said we would do all these things, go to Comic-Con, meet George, review all these things early. We never would have imagined that. We just wanted to just have a podcast and get into it. Like we could not have predicted having done that. So
gosh, and it's 10 years later, right? So I mean, it's pretty major. So I guess for those of us of Vassals of Kingsgrave, how we kind of all got together was through the forums that you, and I think Mimi still generously funds, which always amazes me. How did the forums come to life, and what was that interaction like between the people on the forums and the main podcast? Because they were really, I mean, less so now, but at the peak, they were so vibrant. I mean, that used to be like my landing page on the web, and I was just on it constantly. I don't know how I did any work between 2010 and 2014.
Well, okay, let's give Mimi the credit which is due. So when the podcast started in 2008, we just had the comments page on each, people can comment on the episodes, which was good, but I always wanted a forum from the start. I thought, hey, this is good. I've been involved in forums for other things, and I wanted just to put some cheap forum up, like one of the free services or some easy way. And Mimi thought, no, let's do this properly. So we kind of put it on the side until she had the time to do it properly. And I mean, we had a hiatus, I think, as well before the forums went out. Yeah, there's a certain period around 2009 we had a hiatus, so that we just weren't podcasting in general. And then when we came back, we thought, okay, let's get a forums, and Mimi actually went and got them up. I'm trying to see when they opened. I think it was at the end of 2010. So actually it was a couple years into the podcast, but she went and got proper forums that, have the features and are still up now. And there was another period when the forums were down.
I think it was kind of very early days of VOK.
Yeah,
it was just like, how do we organize shit? And also like, what do I do with all this time that I now have? I mean, it was really like existential crisis.
That was me, I think.
Yeah, there were a lot of email chains.
Was that you? Were you the one who killed the forums, I mean?
I think so. I was trying to update because Mimi usually updated things on the website when it needed to, and then she was away, and so I tried to update, and then something happened, and it was summer 2013 because that's when VOK started, and it was gone for a couple of months in the summer. I remember that, the great blackout of the forums. But you're right, there's so many people on the forums, and it still amazes me to this day that other than a few hiccups, the moderation has been minimal compared to any other internet forum, I think, which is good because I couldn't handle it. I wouldn't have the time to do like the moderation that a lot of the main websites requires, but people just kind of self-regulate themselves.
Yeah, it's very surprising.
I'll mention one other quick thing, just from early on. A podcast of Ice and Fire was just one of the potential names.
Oh, really? What were the other names?
I'm looking at the chat logs. I'll send you these chat logs, actually, if you want to.
Yeah, hilarious. Please do.
Chris's idea was the Brave Companions. Could be the podcast. Oh,
that's nice.
And then I thought the Sorrowful Podcasters. So those are the alternative.
So melancholy. I feel that's where VOK is sometimes now, with the Sorrowful Podcasters, when we discuss the endless wait for TWOW and the probable non-publication of dreams, and we just become very melancholy and sad. But anyway, I'm jumping to a later question. So cool. So that's how the forums started. Were you surprised, I mean, in a sense, by the success of the forums, the success of the show, just that kind of like virtuous circle of craziness that hit, and how heavily trafficked you guys were?
Yeah, I definitely was. I mean, the forums in general were, so slightly before the TV show, but definitely the TV show coming out increased the activity of them. And that was a big period for us, I guess, from 2011 to, let's say, 2014, 15. Lots of activity on the forums, lots of new people coming in. Mimi's idea was smart to make it that you had to at least register an account to even view. So that maybe got people that would alert at least to register. And then maybe once you register, you're more likely to post, right? If you do see something. So yeah, it was surprising. I enjoyed it. But again, the thing that always impressed me was how little moderation was required. People just knew that, I mean, it was just an extension of what I thought it would be. It would just be a group of friends talking about something. And then when you're with your they're friends. Hopefully you don't need a moderator to come in and help you. You can just figure it out yourselves, right?
But it is hugely unusual, and I think there's maybe something about the tone of the main podcast and maybe how you all interact with each other and are very different in your personalities, but it somehow works. And then that carried on to the forums, and then hopefully we've tried to carry it on to VOK. And it always amazes me because it's so different to the rest of the interwebs. And I think there's something about that general civility which makes VOK and a podcast of Ice and Fire very precious to those of us who are involved in it, because it's kind of like this is possible, right? We can have different views and we can still all be friends, and it's very unusual. But I think it does mean that when someone comes in, and which is incredibly rare when you get a genuine troll, it is quite shocking, because it's sort of like it's this kind of chill wind from the outside that reminds you, this is kind of like how a lot of internet is, and we just forgot. So have there been, this is a follow-up question, have there been any controversies or conflicts over the years that you've had to deal with, and how does that affect you, or is it actually pretty infrequent, so it's okay kind of thing?
I think for main podcasts, a podcast of Ice and Fire, I think it's been fine. I think, in fact, there's people that early on would criticize us, but they kept it pretty civil, and eventually they actually became fans of the podcast. This is even pre-forums, but I mean, for the most part, we were fine until, I don't even know if we want to go into detail about something, but you and Nadia are well aware that there's been people that have come and caused trouble directly to you guys. That was shocking at that time, but they were people that are specifically coming in and wanting to be trolls. Like usually if a single troll came in, people would just ignore them, right? But once they come and start being active and start messaging people, that's happened, but that's only that one-time incident that it's happened to my
And even then it was such a classic forum reaction, which was try and kill them with kindness. Like, this is kind of not how we act here. And I remember a couple of the curators tried to ring this person up and have some Skype chats and, just be so civil and kind and explain that please be part of the community. You have good ideas, but don't be a dick. It was so VOK-y. It was so kind of how can we kind of bully this person with kindness? It was really funny to me. And when it wasn't at the time, but in retrospect, it was such a VOK-y reaction.
Well and done. It's okay. At the time, it was bad. But I mean, the reason why, I guess, is because people came from YouTube and barely knew anything, right? They were not connected with having listened to hundreds of episodes and then going on the forums, so they did not build that connection.
Exactly. And I think that's what I mean about the code of conduct really coming from Podcast of Ice and Fire, and those original VOK hosts being people who were all fans, right? So we all knew all about Podcast of Ice and Fire, and I think that has become weaker. But it's brought more diverse voices to VOK, which is kind of cool as well. So, I mean, there's pros and cons, but it was kind of how do we as VOK curators try and imbue that code that you guys did so unconsciously but beautifully with the main podcast? And I think it all settles down in the end, doesn't it? But so a happier question is, are there any memorable threads or former members of the forums that you'd love to see back, or any particular kind of running jokes on the forums that you particularly like?
Sure. I remember there's somebody called Apocalypse Dan who was in the forums. He was one of our critics.
What happened to him?
Yeah. He just peaced out. People come and go, right? I guess they lost interest. He hasn't been sometimes it's interesting to go click on someone and see the last time they logged in. I don't know if that shows up to everyone or just to me, but you can see if people haven't logged in for years.
I think everyone can see that.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool to see. There's Apocalypse Dan who was on some of our Guys Night Out episodes, and then there was a Christina who was half Asian. Do you remember her?
Oh, was that Christina
the archaeologist?
Yeah.
Sorry?
The archaeologist?
Yes, that's right. Christina the archaeologist.
Oh, yeah. She was so good.
Whatever happened to Dickon Manwoody? She was great.
If you go and sort the forums by number of posts and then go down a bit, probably the first or second page are a ton of old school people I'd love to see come back.
Yeah, definitely. The Wardens of the Witty.
Yeah, just the posting system, getting the posts and moving up the micro. No, I think it started with Tiny Woody or something, and then I think Poe from the Pulps. You remember Poe from the Pulps? I think it was him saying at least it's not Micro Woody, and then I changed him to Micro Woody. And he was like, I didn't know my ex-girlfriend was on here.
The absolute feeling of accomplishment in life of going up those rankings, which is just insane in retrospect.
Are you you're the top of the top now, Bina, or did your VOK thing go overlap on it? But you have the top, don't you? Are you a Warden of the Woody?
Yeah, I am. But I think FT Ward would be up there as well. He's probably one of the old school people when I joined, who was already kind of a key poster who's still around. A lot of the other people have gone, East Texas Starwolf and And even Shellfish was really big for a while, and then he disappeared. My running joke is whenever anyone leaves, is that they got laid, they got a girlfriend, and then they left.
Well, we had Brendan, the podcast historian.
Yeah,
he's a really cool guy.
Oh,
And
yeah.
He left because he didn't want to watch the show anymore, so he was avoiding spoilers. But he actually did statistical analysis on the show, and there's a graph where of the first 70 episodes or something, we had something akin of like 40 or 50 guest hosts, which I think is incredible.
Yeah,
I think that
really
many
great.
guest hosts.
Absolutely. Okie dokie. So can you tell us about how, I think you've done this before, but I think it's worth repeating, like how you came up with the idea of Vassals of Kingsgrave, and I guess more interestingly is what you think of it and how it's developed.
Well, this will be a long answer if that's okay. Okay, so in 2012, summer 2012, I was starting to not burn out, but I wanted to talk about other things. Where I had the idea of doing other podcasts even from the start. I couldn't do a Frasier one now, but I wanted to. I've been watching some anime, I've been watching some movies, and so I made Vassals of Kingsgrave to talk about other topics with the hosts and with listeners and fans of the main show. And we did that for about a year, and I think I had about like 10 episodes in the 1 year. So it was difficult to do many episodes, and it was only the ones that I really did. I think Ashley did a couple. So I enjoyed it, but the problem was you needed one of the hosts to do it. And sometime early in 2013, and I don't know where that post is, there was an original post where I kind of posted on one of the episodes saying, well, maybe we can just have like another podcast to just do it without us, like just the listeners. And then no one responded to that post, and then just sat there. And then a couple months later into May, I saw that post again. I thought, let me think about this again. And then I put more thought into it, thought we could have the Vassals of Kingsgrave, we could do all these things. And that post is up there. I posted, and then like Vic responded right away saying, hey, that's a great idea. Let's do it.
Well, I think we were very lucky in having in Vic someone who technologically knew what he was doing with podcasting. And I think he was where you were before Podcast of Ice and Fire, where he'd been thinking about getting into podcasting and doing various things. And then this was a cool route into it. Whereas even if someone if I had seen that post, which I had, I just don't think I would have had the confidence or the wherewithal to kind of say yes. But as soon as Vic was like, okay, I can do this, I can record, I can edit, then it was like, oh, okay, I can chat shit. That's my core competence. So I'm in.
Well, I think, VOK probably, I can't say it never would have happened, but it would not have happened without VOK. A lot of the early people in VOK had done VOK episodes already. Absolutely. As like a transition.
Yeah.
So they got that experience. Maybe they might even help edit, but at least, they got that experience of talking about other topics. And also, the general idea of bringing an ice and fire perspective to other things, which VOK often does as well, right? I think, not that it always happens, but it was, especially early on, has that perspective, which hadn't been done. It's kind of weird to come from an ice and fire perspective to other things. So it just took that and went on there. And then I was sure you had guest hosted by that point, or at least knew the people, right? It's easier to podcast people before, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what was quite nice in those days is the forums were so tight and so frequent that even if you hadn't guest hosted with someone, you felt like you knew them, and it really took a lot of the the insecurity out of it, because I'd never done anything like this, and I think it was quite easy to bounce in, and it just felt like so low stakes. You just assume there was no listeners, so it was kind of like you can just take a punt,
Well, you
that
had
was the
the
only
guaranteed
reason I
listens.
joined.
Yeah, exactly.
When did you join on? You joined pretty early too, right, Nadia? I think you did some of the.
Yeah, it was, I think, around episode 6 or 7.
Yeah, we're both single digit VOKers.
Yeah.
You knew that you had at least you had the formers that would listen, right? So you had a guaranteed audience, but also a friendly audience, right? So
that's the huge difference. I remember being utterly shocked. I think we'd been doing VOK for about 3 years when I realized we had a YouTube channel, and I just didn't know we had that many listeners. I just assumed that the only people listening to us was ourselves. So it was a forum. It was a podcast created by people on the forums for people on the forums, purely for our own amusement. Which is why if anyone, looking back now, was on YouTube comments complaining about audio quality or whatever, it's like, I really don't care, because this is just for us to amuse ourselves while we're waiting for a new Podcast of Ice and Fire episode. It never occurred to me that other people would listen, because the in-jokes were so thick. And like you say, just applying, doing, marry scorpions, or, all these silly ice and fire games that we had, even when we were doing something totally non-ice and fire related. I was like, what is the Venn diagram of people who actually are going to get all this and find it interesting? So it never ceases to amaze me that that has any listeners you want on the forums.
Well, you didn't talk down to your audience is the thing. Like, you didn't have a problem with using the in-jokes. And it's kind of like, well, if you want to get them, listen to the other episodes, right? And then that actually, I think, is a formula for success. Maybe not on the biggest stage, but people actually really get into something will go and listen to all the other episodes, and then they will enjoy the references even more.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we have is what we don't have in terms of audio quality and organizational capability. We make up for in the fact that a lot of us, especially now, like we've done hundreds of hours together, but also a lot of people have met up in real life. So just this last Sunday in London, there was World Meet, where you had people from France and America and Scotland and England and all over the place meeting up, Germany meeting up, which I think is pretty unusual. And it does mean that there's a level of kind of camaraderie and real world friendliness that does come across. But nonetheless, does all this mooting and podcasting kind of surprise you? Just like that we've got to 500? I don't know. I mean, it's a bit bonkers, isn't it?
It does surprise me. I mean, but even from the start, I'm just looking at the post where it started. There were so many people that would contribute something to it. Like we have Dickon Manwoody or Varsuvia. She came up and did the artwork for it.
Yeah, the logo, which is amazing.
And then people help with iTunes. But it's really incredible when you think about it. Like, what is VOK? It's this multi-continental show about a variety of things. It really is like a community radio station, and there's no other podcast like it out there. It's something new. Like I can't think of anything else like in podcasting that is this broad and this open to have.
And I think it makes it resilient as well, because it means people can take a year off because they're finishing their PhD or because they're switching jobs or for whatever reason, and other voices come through and in, and then it evolves, it becomes more diverse, younger, whatever it is. And I find it's amazing how it's evolved. I mean, if you listen to like a VOK in the 200s versus one in the 400s to one, it does sound different, but not in a bad way. So there's a little bit of flex in there, which I think is quite nice, but it does mean it's just more chaotic and, it just does its thing.
Toward it, how in terms of managing it, because actually this Ice and Fire, the whole thing that I'm involved in is the third thing I was involved in online to like the third big community. The first two were gaming communities. I played a game called Age of Empires, and that was big back then. There was a whole community there, and then I played a game called Asheron's Call. And the things that I learned from those two communities and being involved in organizations and websites is too much micromanagement and too much control, especially by people that are not active anymore, will stall or cause problems. So that has always been my approach to VOK. I help start it, but I don't make any decisions on its operation now. It's for the people that are active in it and the curators to do it. If they ask for my advice, I'll give my advice. But I've never come in and you can attest to it, to be like, no, you're doing it this way, or I'm going to overrule. I've never done that,
actually,
right?
It's amazing, really. Like, I mean, we as curators always say it's just an amazingly generous space that you all have created, not just like on your forums, literally, but it's kind of cool how it operates. And when things do happen, like when we had that troll incident, it is really nice to then call on you and say, look, what is your advice, or can you intervene, because you have a certain level of authority on those forums that we obviously don't have. But yeah, it's kind of nice and symbiotic, and I think it's cool that occasionally VOK people will like guest host on the main podcast, and occasionally they'll come and like chat with us. But there's definitely a difference in, I don't know, I don't want to say audio quality because that makes it sound so simplistic, but there is a difference of tone, I guess, between the two. And I think, that's kind of nice as well, that they're kind of related and affectionate towards each other, but they're slightly different.
And then also in terms of the forums, like, I mean, a lot of the curators and other people have admin access over the VOK forums, so they're able to edit those. And also then from them, I've made some of the moderators on the main forum to have their help, so that they've also helped the main podcast as well, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I view. I mean, in general, VOK is kind of like the legacy of a podcast of Ice and Fire, because we're all busy, can't do as much as we did before. And I know one day we'll stop, but hopefully VOK will have a even longer shelf life.
So the final VOK question is, do you actually listen to any of them? And if so, do you have a favorite episode or set of episodes that VOK has done? And we won't be insulted if you say you don't listen, because there's a lot of content.
So I do listen. I don't, obviously, the point of it is to pick the ones that you're interested in, right?
Absolutely.
And so I listen to the Ice and Fire convention recaps. I like seeing that perspective since I'm there as well. I like to see like what other people thought of it, or even of me there. And then I listen to often when a movie comes out and I want to talk about or listen to like the different Avenger movies, VOK usually does that. So I'll listen to those, or even try to drop in to chat. So the movie podcasts, the Ice and Fire conventions. They did him from spring reviews of the work that we did. Of course, I like to see their thoughts on that. Some of the World of Ice and Fire and kind of theory discussion episodes, I listened to that. And then I did listen to the World Cup chats that you had.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Every 4 years the World Cup comes out, I'm like, I don't want to get into this. I know it's so much cheating, but I still watch it anyway, and I want to see what your opinions are. So I did listen. So I do listen, and I enjoy it. I also, Bina, I listened to one of your, I think you did an episode on O.J. Simpson.
Oh, yeah, with No True Lady. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one. I remember that was one of the ones we all were aware of, but I didn't know the details. Like, we were alive at that time to be aware of, but it was interesting to hear all the actual details of the trial.
Yeah, the true crime, I really enjoy getting into all that stuff. It's nice to find some fellow sickos to talk about that.
So I do listen, and I do enjoy the references, and I do enjoy when people talk about me. I'm human.
Why not? Why not? Oh, dear. What's it like when people come up to you at cons and they know you? Like, is it everyone like embarrassingly gushing, or do you just enjoy it every second of it?
Well, the thing with Ice and Fire Con is, since it's the same group goes every year for the most part, we all know each other now really well. Like, the first year was maybe a little bit weird or odd because people would recognize me by voice, right? They're like, hey, I know that voice. It's Amin. But now it's usually the same people I've already met. But even last year, there's people that were new there that, they'd come and say, thanks so much. I enjoy listening to your podcast. I've been listening for years. And of course, I'm like, that's great. Like, I never thought I actually would meet the people that would listen to me back then. I never knew it would go this far. I never knew there'd be a convention. So it's awesome. It's great to meet people that it's interesting because you haven't, I mean, unless you've talked to them before as guests or on the forum, you haven't spent hours talking to them, but they've spent hours listening to you. So they already know a lot of your views.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go to how has your opinion of, let's start with just the books and the characters changed over time.
I think probably my main change is on certain characters. I think and it's evident even from the podcast. And that's why I like actually listening to the podcast and be like, what did I think 4 or 5 years ago? What did I think 10 years ago? It's a snapshot of it that you would forget. I think people forget. I didn't like Stannis at the start. I thought he was an annoying. I think I called him an annoying George Constanza from Seinfeld. I didn't like him, and then now I like him, and that's just been an overall development just on like rereading and reading his lines and just getting kind of like reading them with a little bit of humor. Like I think History of Westeros does. Like, there actually is some humor in some of the things he says. So I've changed my view on characters like Stannis. I think I've always liked the Hound. I think I've been consistent on that. But I think like maybe even Littlefinger, I didn't like him initially, and then I thought, okay, Littlefinger, I don't like him, but he's interesting in terms of what he does to the storyline. Initially, there were certain characters I did not like to read. Now I like every character in the terms of I get something out of every character point of view. I don't know. Some people like, I think Ashley and Kyle, they don't like Bran chapters or something. Oh, another Bran chapter. I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter who it is. I'll get some value out of it.
I think I would say actually that Stannis is the character who you all on Podcast Ice and Fire have changed my view on the most. And I would say VOK has changed my opinions on the Jaime-Cersei dynamic a lot. That's what I love about listening to podcasts about works, and also the depth and the richness of George and some of the slipperiness and how he writes. That even now, like so many years after I initially read those chapters, there are still things that other people can say about them that can alter my views, which I really love. Have you reassessed your view on Feast Dance since you first got them?
For sure. I think Feast in particular, both me and that friend, I don't think he listens, but his name is James, that got me into the books originally. We both did not like Feast when it came out. Then I reread Feast a lot and I got value out of it and I liked it. And then I was shocked 2 years later to talk to him about it and be like, yeah, I liked Feast. Now, oh, okay, you changed your view as well. He doesn't like dance though. He still doesn't like dance.
Have you done the Feast Dance reread? That I think Boiled Leather organized the chapters in a chronological order. Have you done that reread?
No, I have not done that, but I'm actually thinking about it once we eventually get to Feast in the main Podcast of Ice Fire chapter reread. We might just do that, I'm thinking, instead of leaving dance all the way till the end.
I would thoroughly recommend it.
I've heard
adds
that.
So much.
Yeah. I think it makes a big difference, right?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways to order them as well, but I mean, just the idea of pairing them together is good. And in terms of dance, the thing that I get value out of it is just the North storyline is as good as any other George writing when he covers the North. So he's still got it for the North. It's just got too much world building everywhere else, but he got to the point where he needs to do. Like, the next book's going to be really good. We just need the next book.
Preach. Okay, so and what is your view on how the fandom has evolved over time? That's kind of a more interesting question in a way.
Positive in the sense that there was only a few places that people were involved in back in 2000, but now there's Reddit, there's Tumblr, there's people on Twitter. It's a lot more diverse and different ideas coming out and different rethinkings of characters and reinterpretations and new theories. So there always was a lot of theories back in, let's say, like 2002, 2003, 2004, but there's just so many now. And some of them just go off the wall. They're just crazy, but there's a lot there. There's people put a lot of thought, and then there's also a lot of just like, because George has done all these side work, World of Ice and Fire, and developing the Dunk stories. Actually, the Dunk stories, for example, when Mystery Night first came out, I didn't like it that much, and we did not do an episode review for it for a while, or a proper one.
Yeah,
anyway,
which amazed me actually in retrospect when I realized that.
Sorry, I was just going to say that's probably my favorite podcast of Ice and Fire episode, the Mystery Night episode. It was so good.
I agree.
I could agree. That could be one of our best because we did not do that one till far later, right? We did the first two early on, and then once we got to that one, we were all well established. Had the Group of Four was another good adaptation. I mean, we liked our old hosts, but too many hosts, as you know from VOK, sometimes you just can't. It's too disorganized, right? How can you have like 7 or 8?
Oh my god,
hosts?
I think Princess and the Queen, we had like 10. It was insane.
By the time it's your time to talk, you've forgotten what you want to say. There's too many people, right?
Very hard to make it organic, definitely.
Yeah. Having the core 4 was ideal because then we get the guest or two on to join us, but we had the core 4 there, and so we applied that to Mystery Night. And because the first time I read Mystery Night, I did not get like the fact that like Blood Raven was like, you know, there through magic and that kind of stuff. I didn't get it in the first read, and there's only in the rereads that came out, and so there's a lot more depth here.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Like one of the things I wanted to do for VOK 500 is people to admit stuff that they didn't get on the first read. Just little like 30-second clips from everyone, just stitch them all together. First time I read Game of Thrones, I didn't realize Renly was gay. So, you know, thank God for the community is all I can say. Oh my goodness. Cool. So let's go to, in terms of the fandom evolving though, like you did the Wait for Feast, which my first wait was the Wait for Dance, but I had it quite a lot of it. Do you think we've become too hard on George, too cynical? This kind of links into the final question here, which is from Claudius the Fool, who's a bookshop owner and bookseller. How do you respond to the fans of the series that have become indifferent, annoyed by the publication of supplemental material before the series is actually finished? And I think he is in that category where he's become almost indifferent to the series from being a huge fan. Like he can't anymore, you know? Do you think that's justified, sad, unfair on George? What's the take?
I think what the 5th book Wake did, and the current one to a degree, like especially the 5th book, if you waited for it, either accepted it or you didn't. Like there's a lot of people that burned out or just left; they couldn't handle with it. But you kind of get to a zen state that if you want to stay in there, it'll come out when it comes out, and you almost have to do that. If you're there every day trying to check the post, see when it's coming out, you just frustrate yourself. You just got to think when it comes out, I'll evaluate it then. And so I don't blame anyone for getting burned out or just not wanting to keep up with it or not interested in the supplementary materials. The only thing that would annoy me though is to beat on George. I mean, George does not owe it to you to get it out whenever. If George wanted to quit, for example, he said, I'm done with this, I want to go live out the rest of my life exploring Asia or something, that's up to him. Like I wouldn't be pissed off because there's no requirement that he has to finish the books. It's not required. There's no deal that you made.
Let me give you an alternative though. Do you feel he genuinely is trying to finish, or is he kidding himself and us? Like, so I would give you an alternative. I know people who started PhDs that typically take 6 years and get bored and flunk out. He's been writing these books for over 20 years now. It would be perfectly acceptable to say, you know what, I'm actually quite bored of this. There's other stuff I find more interesting. Would it be more honest to just give whatever bits of plot that he's worked out to another person to finish off the series?
Well,
Being provocative there.
Well, I mean, he's done that to an extent with the TV show, right? If you wanted an ending, you could watch the TV show. If you just want the ending, it'll be in the TV show in terms of like what happens. Most of the things that happen in the end, I mean, there's so much has changed, but the main characters should be the same. So if you just want the ending, watch the TV show. But I think he's trying to finish it. I think that it is obvious, though, that he has some kind of mental block. And I don't know if he's admitted to himself or not, but he's locked in. And part of that has to be that, I mean, this has become his magnum opus, and he does not want to do subpar work, right? Like it's almost better not to have not to finish it than to do a poor ending.
It's also like an order of magnitude more complicated than any other fantasy series ever written, right? And just in terms of number of characters and plot threads. So I think it's kind of like, even if you don't have a conventional writer's block, the idea that it's just bloody hard to weave all these threads together and bring them all back into one, I kind of have sympathy with that.
I mean, he is drawing upon people like Elio and Linda to keep track of stuff, but it's almost like maybe, if he's serious about finishing it, put together a team of people there to help him with references or something, like have like a whole like base that he's working on,
like a writer's room.
Yes, with help for just reference. But that's not the case. I think he's got some kind of mental block, and if he wasn't doing the people are pissed with supplementary material. If he wasn't doing the supplementary material, he'd be playing online poker. He'd just be doing something else, right? Like when you get a block on something, you just end up doing something else. The issue is that when you have an assignment or your job is on the line, you just make yourself do it, or you lose that, or you don't get paid. George doesn't have that, that hanging over him anymore than he did 20 years ago. If he didn't do that, he wouldn't be getting income. He's got plenty of income now. So here's the thought, though, then. Maybe it would have been better if he stopped the last few years and went and just did some other series and came back. If he's not writing anything, he could actually be further along. Like, it's not just a matter of just summing up the amount of time put in. It's a matter of what he's producing, right? So what if, like, right after Dance, he went and worked on some other thing, and maybe that would have cleared up his mental block, and then he came back. It could be no worse. The main problem I have now is not even so much the series not getting done. Of course, I'd like the series to get done. But it's like, imagine if George had finished the series and then he spent the last 10 years in some other series. What are we missing from other work? And he has that capability. He's done other works that we're missing. We're not getting the next Haviland top work. We're not getting other stuff. And
getting a whole bunch of wildcards.
That's right. It's not the other projects that are slowing him down. It's the main project that's slowing him down and slowing other projects down.
And it's almost facile, isn't it? Like, I actually did cave in and then just end up watching Game of Thrones because I reached that zen place of calm that you described with the show versus books. And to be sure, I can watch this final season and figure out what happens, like who ends up on the Iron Throne, such as it is. But it's not so much about where we. I mean, I do want to know where we end up, but it's. I want to read his beautiful sentences and his descriptions and his. I want him to tell me, and I'm greedy like that. So. Yeah.
Even just getting the next book is like, there's going to be so much to discuss in the next book, so much going on. He's set up so much. I just love the character interactions. That's how I described the books years ago. It was just, he made really interesting characters and then just set them into play.
Exactly. So to me,
that interaction.
To me, it's never been about world building, although for some people it's all about that. And it's been a little bit about plot, but it's mostly been about character evolution. So the people I find most fascinating, there's sort of the Jamies and, the Theon Reeks and people who really evolve through the story. Even Tyrion at the moment is in a very dark place, and whether he can come back, whether Arya can come back. I mean, I think these are fascinating and provocative. So, George, what have you done to us?
It's just, we don't know what state the next book is. Like, I mean, like, it could be that he only has 100 pages done. Like, didn't his editor say they only have that? But could it really be the case? I don't know. I don't think about the books later on. I just want this one when it comes out.
Yeah. In the absence of a new book, will you continue doing Podcast of Ice and Fire, or do you think there's a point at which you could just lose personally? Not Podcast of Ice and Fire doesn't exist, but that you personally would dial out. I mean, I'm on the record as saying that when we finish our current linear reread, I won't read Song of Ice and Fire again unless there's a new book, because I've said all I can possibly say about it. There's other stuff to read and I'm kind of done. But do you feel that you still have that passion for it and that love of talking about it to sustain you for maybe 3-4 more years?
Yes, I do. I think, well, the thing is, because we're going at such a slow pace right now with our episodes, because people are busy. Literally every week I email, I'm like, hey, how's your schedule this week? And it's like everyone's busy, or we have like one day that works. We will finish our reread in the sense that unless something like something unforeseen comes to block it, my goal is to finish the reread to the end of the 5th book. And then at that point, we might be done. If there's no new material, that's it. Then I think we're done in terms of the podcast. But that could be like another 10 years to get through the rest of it. We're reading to the rate that George is writing. We're pacing with him. So we're
it's going to take us like 4 years to do this reread, and when it's done, George will give us a new book.
You did your reread at a very fast pace, though, right? You did. You have all the different people, and you're going at a fast pace. So
we slowed down recently. We definitely slowed down Feast Dance, and I think the peak of people wanting to be on reread episodes, like the height of Storm of Swords, you'd have like 10, 11 people wanting to be on an episode. Now it's definitely down to the core group, and I think that you can see the relative lack of passion for Feast Dance, definitely.
Well, if you look at it objectively, I mean, a lot of things are kind of stalling right now. The art project, we're like a couple of chapters away from finishing the third MS Paint project, but then no one will do it. It's like, come on, if we could a couple more, and then we'd have a third art book. No one's doing it, not even me. I gotta blame myself. I'm not doing it either. Like no one is doing it. And then I did the Supreme Court of Westeros, which we're going on formal hiatus, but we're at ruling 149, so we have one ruling left, and we're not getting enough people to do that. It's like everything's just stalled right now.
I do feel like that. We're sort of trapped in this kind of weird limbo. Yeah. Well. But
that being said, I asked for early review copies of the Fire and Blood thing, and we're gonna review that when it comes. I do enjoy reviewing things when they come out, and not just the books. I've always been into the board game. I played the board game Game of Thrones since 2003 when it came out, and there's a new expansion coming out for that. I beta tested for that. We'll have the designer on to interview him. So there's all these additional or side projects that we will continue and do, but those are not frequent, right? They might be every couple of years or something.
Are you excited for Fire and Blood? Because I was very disappointed by the last, was it The Sons of the Dragon? It was just something we'd already read before, just in slightly more detail. And I feel like Fire and Blood is also just going to expand on stuff we've already heard. So it's not going to be anything new. So are you excited for that?
I am excited in the sense that, I always try to, whatever George writes, he puts meaning and ideas in there. I like to extract things out of it. I enjoy discussing it. And often it just, when it comes out, it's a good chance to get all 4 podcast hosts together, hopefully. I like that, like getting us all on.
Yeah, that's always lovely when we get all 4 of you. That's a real treat.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I'm going to wrap this up because I have a reread episode to record now. But I really want to thank you, Amin, for taking the time out, and just actually all of you at a podcast of Ice and Fire, but you in particular for being so generous and, well, coming up with the idea, but just like giving us the space to do our thing on the forums and generally being incredibly supportive. And I think certainly in those early days, the only reason anyone who probably wasn't on the forums was listening is because you guys were sort of mentioning us on your podcast. So that really helped. So thank you very much for being on our 500th episode.
Sure, I really enjoyed it. And I remember, didn't you do some of those advertise for VOK back then, Bina? We'd play your voiceover on the end of our episodes.
Absolutely. And if you ever see a call to arms on a Marvel movie or anything, and you want to be on, just let us know. We'd always be very happy to have you on.
Sure, I will do that, and I will join you for episode 1000.
Wonderful. Let's do that. We'll raise a glass of Dawn and Shred to Podcast Ice and Fire finishing its reread, and to us and reaching 1,000.
Yes.
Okay. Have a great evening, everyone.